This week, we're continuing on with our renewed walk through Holy Week. And we're still kind of caught in the same bubble with Jesus' response to what authority do you use to speak with us? And Jesus told him a couple of stories. He's kind of called them out flat out. But here's another parable that we're looking at today that again, it's Jesus not mincing words because he doesn't have the time to mince words. He's done. His message is out there. His fame is well known. His days are numbered. He knows this. Maybe he knows how. Maybe he doesn't. That's been a long debate in theological circles. But he is not playing around with those who think that they have some kind of have higher status with God than the average folk. So he tells this parable about the king who is going to throw an elaborate wedding for his son. Now, the readers of the first version of Matthew would have recognized that this is another allegory, and we certainly can recognize it as another allegory. Whether or not the people that were exactly with Jesus at the time when this was going on understood that there was a lot of hidden meaning that referenced to Jesus himself, again, still up for discussion. Some of them probably picked up on it, some of them probably didn't. But in a follow up, again, to whose authority do I speak? So Jesus tells a story of a king who is throwing a wedding banquet for his son. And he sends out the standard double invitation of the day. So, what this essentially means is the first invitations have gone out, and then they kind of see who's actually going to show up. And then once they recognize that the other guests are of their category, social category, or a version of superiority, whatever they're functioning with, the second invitation is then responded to. Typically what would happen is once they recognize that all the right people had been invited, then the invitation would be responded to positively and the whole process would go on. Because this is essentially for a wedding, especially a royal wedding of that day, the guests alone would create their own town with all their servants they bring and all the presents and all the money and all the excessive partying and it could be there for a few weeks to months to celebrate this event. So it's a big deal. So the king is throwing this banquet and the people who are supposed to be invited, they say no and quite insult the king in the process. They have useless kind of, oh, well, I've got to go to the farm or I've got to do this. So, not really good excuses for why they cannot come to an event, which should be something that honors them in their social category because the king is always going to be the social better of whomever is invited. So, that's the setting. And the people in the first century, whether they be in Jesus' day or in the time of the first writing of Matthew, would have gotten that connection. They would have known what that was all about. So they refuse to attend. And the king sends out servants again to go get the average people in the street. And in the interim, much like the parable of the vineyard, the servants are killed. So again, the allegory is God is the king, Jesus is the son, the servants are the prophets who are not received by the people who naturally have power. So we're talking the Pharisees, Sadducees, scribes, priests, all the ones who were given responsibility for the spiritual maturity and development of the people of God. So then the servants, more servants go out and they invite average folk, which has never ever been done at this kind of a social gathering. It's just, you wouldn't see it. But this is where the point that Jesus is trying to make, that God's world is not the people's world, that there are differences and distinctions in our regular society that God just doesn't recognize, that they aren't part of it. And, the first centuries, they tried really, really hard to honor that understanding. They would have one of the things that Pliny the Younger got really upset about around the first century when he discovered that women were having the role of minister is not that it was women, but that they were actually servants who had some measure of authority in a community that would have included a lot of really wealthy people. That whole social order was very, very strict in the first century. You did not upend it, except that Jesus upended it all the time. But getting back to the story, Jesus then says all these regular people are invited, and they show up and they're prepared for this multi-day feast and celebration. But there's one there who is not dressed, who is not prepared. Now, I've seen a couple of different interpretations of that. One is that the wedding robes would have been provided by the king, so the people would all be there in looking respectable, and this person slipped in without going through that process. Maybe, maybe not. I haven't seen any history that supports it. I haven't seen any history that doesn't support it. So that's definitely one way we could look at it. But I think if we want to keep with the allegory, the symbolism that Jesus is trying to imbue this story with, we have to look a little more at the person who shows up as representative of the people who profess faith but don't actually engage faith. That those who want to mock around and parade around as if somehow they are the special ones to be there, but they don't really understand the work and the commitment that being part of the followers of Christ means. Remember, this is Holy Week. Jesus has no room left for fooling around. The message has got to get out there, and it's got to be sent now. So here we have this parable that starts off fun because the majority of people hearing it are not going to be the guests of a king probably ever. And we kind of get it off on the whole bit about how average people are brought into a place because the rich, the parasite class, essentially has turned their noses up and they've offered that insult. But it's not quite so comfortable when it's one of us who is kicked out and who carries the message that not everybody's going to be chosen. It's not comfortable. In fact, I was fully prepared to start this sermon with, sometimes what Jesus had to say is not nice. It's not. We want to believe that everybody can be included. But see, here's the thing. That one person, that representative of people who spout niceties or pretend like they're doing what they need to be doing, but don't actually internalize the faith. First of all, they're a lot more numerous than we think. They tend to show themselves in public, and they tend to get a lot of attention for themselves. And I dare say quite a few of them end up being on TV, trying to pretend to everyone that their version of Christianity is the real one. But they are us in a very uncomfortable way. They represent the superficial grabbing on, glomming on of our religious tradition. And Jesus is trying to get at something else there. That those of us who are called, who are invited to this incredible banquet, have the responsibility to engage it when we're there. Engage it as we prepare for it. Engage it after we've left the experience. Our faith is not just something where we show up, do, the genuflecting or the bowing or wear the proper things or put things where they need to be in the service. Our faith is a lived thing. Our faith is something that defines how we approach life afterwards. It's very evident, and the leaders of the day eventually did get the message that Jesus was saying they're the ones who are not accepted. But they might have interpreted themselves as that one extra spare person as opposed to the parasite group who decided not to show up, which I think is who Jesus was identifying them with in the first place. But there's always that one person or that representation of people who want to use Christianity as a shield almost, as a convenience. I mean, that goes all the way back to, I usually remember this name, Constantine. That's it. It goes all the way back to Constantine and his using of the Chi-Rho as justifying his own rise to power. The church has been used. The Christian people have used the symbolism of the church in such horrible ways a lot through 2,000 years. But that's not the only thing that's been going on for the last 2,000 years. There are also people who have really internalized what it means to be faithful, what it means to be part of that banquet that the King is setting for us, how to be respectful and responsible guests who would normally not be invited if the parasite class crowded everything out. But in this instance, it's God hosting, not a human king hosting. So we are very much part of how everything goes together. It's also not a passage or a story that says that there's a limited number of people who are going to be accepted. That's another interpretation that's picked up over the centuries, and that's not really fair to anybody. The whole idea is that we have to be very mindful and honest in our faith. The podcast this month that Deb and I just put together talks about how people are living their faith but not necessarily within a church structure, and how that might be a way that Christianity is moving forward in this day and age. It's anyone's guess, but that's certainly something that I can see happening. We've got to start to throw off the assumptions about what a Christian person looks like. You know, a Christian person swears. Real, honest to God, sailors swear. A Christian person cries, just sobs at injustice. A Christian person does what they can in the moment to help who's around them. A Christian person gets engaged in social structure and tries to change the entire structure, recognizing that that structure oppresses certain groups of people. Could even be them. A Christian person takes Jesus' message seriously, that we are to take care of each other, and that is the only way to bring in the new world that God wants to create. A Christian person starts at a place of love and openness, not judgment and dismissiveness. All of this is asked of everyone at the proverbial banquet. In fact, the banquet is often a metaphor used for communion in a lot of our traditions because it is seen as a connection with what is going on in heaven. A Christian person is not someone who acts in convenience, who decides that here's a community where I'll just throw around the God language and then I'll go and do something else later. That's who was being called out. Our authenticity, our truthfulness is how we live a life that Jesus has called us to live. That is essentially the metaphor of the cloak that's being put on us, the wedding cloak in the story, but the cloak of Christianity that we have assumed to wear. It is not just that we get the privilege, it's that we also get the work and the responsibility to be there and honor that gift. That's what Jesus was talking about. And way too often, those in leadership who try to control and contain what that message is about have lost their focus, that they miss the message. When Jesus was speaking to these people, when this story was shared, when they realized that they were the bad guys and reacted emotionally, that's exactly what Jesus was going for. It's time for leadership, those who block others out, those who don't understand what Christianity is about in all its simplicity. It's time for them to step aside and let the rest have an opportunity to rise up and serve. The phoniest Christians are not going to understand the world that Jesus wants to create. Those who want to engage in that are going to have a sense of wisdom and experience beyond what words can give us. And that's the joy that we have in a story that seems very judgmental and very harsh. In the middle of that are all the people who came when called, who put on the mantle of what Christ has asked us to do, and continue to be there to be celebrating what the King has offered, if you want to go with that metaphor, but what Jesus has called us to be as community. As I said, it's Holy Week. Jesus doesn't have a whole lot of time left. We've got to get this message when we can, because then it's on us to share it with others.